Hey, good afternoon. Welcome back to Effectory's weekly webinar series. My name is Axel, and if you're wondering, hey, you're not the guy I've seen before, that's correct. Arjen is off on a week of well-deserved vacation with his family, so I'm here to step in. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're also wondering, what is Effectory? Well, we are the leading provider in Europe of employee feedback, and today we have a super interesting topic for you to talk about. We have decided to treat you not with one, but two guests, especially after last week was Recession. So no webinar last week, but we're making it up this week, I think. With us today is our very own data genius, Baran Metin, who is our Chief People Analytics Officer at Effectory. And we also have Lamin Kinteh, the founder of Zyvo. But we'll talk a little bit about what Zyvo is and who Lamin is after this. We're going to start today with Baran, but before we give the floor to Baran, what's good for you to know is that you can ask your questions, and I really would recommend you do so. Just use the form at the bottom of your screen. You can ask any questions at any time for either Baran or Lamin or both. And as they're going to talk about how to use people analytics in general, but also specifically in this more interesting time of COVID-19. Baran, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
How are you doing?
First of all, I'm really humbled by your kind words. I'm doing quite fine. After almost 2 months' time, I left my cave, came to Amsterdam, so some of my colleagues whom I missed, and I'm happy to be here, excited to be here.
Yeah, so we've obviously conducted quite a large number of COVID-19 pulses.
That is true.
I believe we almost have 80,000 respondents, right?
Yeah, that is true. A little bit less than 80,000, a little bit more than 75,000, somewhere in between sweet spot.
Right, yeah, so you're also going to talk a little bit about what we found.
That is true.
Data, right? Well, I don't want to keep you. Before I let you get going, please do submit your questions, and Baran, the floor is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Axel. Just like you mentioned, today I'll be talking about people analytics in general, and especially how to use it effectively in this very difficult times of COVID-19. But before jumping into people analytics, I'd like to talk about the main foundation of people analytics, which is data. Currently, we are actually living in a data age. Do you know how much data we have? We have 40 zettabyte of data. And if you've never heard of zettabyte before, well, I also haven't heard of the zettabyte only recently. And let me tell you this. Imagine that 1 megabyte, our good old friend megabyte, is able to fill in one book. And imagine that every megabyte was equal to 1 tree. So the data sphere that we are sitting on right now, that large mountain, is 15,000 times more than all the trees combined in the world. This is a huge number. This is just insane how much data we can actually store. Clearly, most of this data we are not really making use of, because most of it is irrelevant and our computation power is not there yet. However, some of the organizations, some of the companies that discovered this new data technology and the data age has started to offer their customers high technologies, basically by the foundation of data, and started to provide really good customer services, such as now we are able to select movies depended on our previous likes, or we are able to determine a route that is going to take us to our destination in the most effective and quick way. We can predict what's going to happen in certain financial reports or stocks, but most important, or what makes me most excited, is that data has shown us what has never been seen before, a picture of a black hole. But given all this information, are we there yet in HR world? To me, not quite there yet. Let me tell you why. So we can argue that organizations have two really important assets, right? One is financial capital and one is human capital. And from what we know from occupational psychology, these two are related. So if you treat your treat your employees well, you are more likely to increase your financial capital. However, what we know is that 5% of the big data investments are made in HR. It sounds very little. And in case your humans, your employees, are the driving power for your financial capital, I think they require a little bit more attention to understand how they feel and how to keep their well-being and functioning in the highest level. Good news is that 71% of the HR professionals now believe that making the best use of people data is really important. So one of the best ways to make use of people data is people analytics. What is people analytics? It's becoming more of a buzzword lately, but shortly I can wrap it up as a data-driven approach to explore the connections between certain HR processes, people experiences, and organizational success. So it is using people's opinions, people's data to make better organizational decisions. Luckily, there is now more employee data available and more professionals available to be able to analyze the data. And people analytics is becoming more and more popular in the organizations to help get better organizational decisions. Let me walk you through this process. How is this process really going through? So as I said, it is the connection between HR activities and processes, people experiences, and organizational outcomes. What are those? Certain HR activities and processes can be summarized as exit surveys, onboarding surveys, trainings, maybe diversity programs. All of these information that you have within HR can be actually connected to how people feel. And how people feel, we can actually take this information from employee surveys and ask them what do they feel about their managers, what do they feel about their working conditions, are they engaged, are they committed, do they feel valued. All of this information is available through employee surveys, right? And also, organizational outcomes can be summarized as certain CRM data, marketing numbers, sales, productivity, and luckily, people analytics can actually provide us a dimension where we can actually explore the connection between these different islands in an advanced statistical way. To give an example, for example, if HR is spending a lot of money on their training programs or making a lot of investment on certain training programs such as agile training, leadership training, consultancy training, and whether to see if this is leading to engagement is a perfect question that can be answered by people analytics. Suppose that your employee engagement is subpar. So maybe investing in right training tools can make your employees more engaged within your organization. People analytics can also look into the relationships between different people experiences. For example, do engaged people also tend to stay longer in your organization? This is also really important for organizations, right? Therefore, people analytics can actually provide you additional information for this aspect. Last but not least, people analytics can actually show you the connection between people outcomes and organizational outcomes. Do having engaged employees actually reflect on my financial turnover? So if my employees are really happy in their organization and really focusing on their tasks and having a work-related state of mind, does it really reflect in return of investment? These are really classical people analytics topics. So what we see here is actually a very systematic approach. First, we describe the problem. What is the problem? Low engagement. Later, we actually look how to diagnose this problem. What are the predictors for engagement? How can we actually turn this around? What kind of investments do we need to do in order to make engagement better? Later, we actually try to predict the outcome of our investment. What are we going to earn if we make investments and have more engaged employees? Last but not least, we will be actually providing a sort of prescription to help organizations. Do your investment in A, B, C to improve your employees' engagement, and your financial turnover might raise by 10% by the end of the year.
So, Baran, you're going to talk to us a little bit about the COVID-19 data, but before you do, we already have our first questions coming in.
Lovely.
So thanks everyone for doing so, but keep them coming. One of the questions that I thought was most interesting was from Elcho, who works at KLM, our Dutch national pride. And they're asking if it can already predict certain outcomes? So not just look at what's happened already, but can it also predict certain outcomes?
Well, it can certainly predict certain outcomes. As I said, this can be done by longitudinal data, or this can be done by looking into the relationship between different data resources. There are predictive analysis that can actually help us understand what kind of trends are hidden within the data. And to respond to Elsa's question, indeed, it is possible to make predictive analysis, and to some extent, what should we invest in to get what kind of an outcome.
Right. And could you give a specific example of something that we've done in predicting outcomes?
Sure. Actually, one of our customers, I remember recently, only 1 month ago, in the beginning of the COVID process, was actually looking for which performance indicators should they actually determine in order to really assess their KPIs. So basically, taking into account employees' engagement or their employership scores, or whichever indicators needed to be actually meshed in a blender to get the best outcome. And well, honestly, I do not know the results yet because it's been so recent, but it is also really important to follow up on these results in order to understand if our recommendations were useful, so that we can actually look into this data in a more progressive way, in a more continuous way.
Thanks, Baran.
You're welcome.
So everybody, please keep coming, those questions. And of course, Lamin, in the second part of today, will also talk a little bit more about using people analytics to predict. So please do stick around, because that's going to be super interesting. So don't let me keep you, Baran. Please share with us what you found in the COVID data.
Absolutely. So indeed, the main topic of my talk was how to use people analytics really effectively in times of COVID, right? So COVID-19 came in like a wrecking ball. It certainly changed our whole work atmosphere almost overnight. Now we are working at homes and try to communicate on digital environments. And clearly, people did not adjust these changes as rapidly as we expected. What we see from our survey results collected from more than 75,000 people is that 71% of the individuals are worried. So these worries actually have different foundations. They are worried about the confidence in their organization. They are worried about their future in their organization. They are worried about delivering the tasks that they promised once. So in order to understand what these worries actually lead to, it's important to keep in touch with your employees, especially at these times. Moreover, 60% of the employees are actually struggling to find a good balance between work and relaxation. And from what we know from organizational psychology is that having low levels of relaxation might lead to burnout. And this is something that we absolutely do not want. Furthermore, 33% of the employees report low levels of effectiveness. And what are the reasons for this low effectiveness? Is it the communication tools? Is it the unclear goals? Is it the low leadership skills from your organization? We don't know, but you have to look into this in order to understand what the predictors are of low effectiveness. Last but not least, 25 to 50% of the individuals have reported that their productivity is going low due to certain distractions. And these distractions could be voices from outside, kids running in the house, pets asking for attention. And these are all the result of certain changing circumstances, right? Therefore, we really need to address what is happening right now in these changing circumstances in order to get the best results. Furthermore, people analytics can actually help you understand in this COVID situation how you can keep your employees engaged. From what we know from the literature, engagement is a really important foundation for employees' well-being and functioning, right? So according to the analysis that I recently made, collaboration, leadership, and autonomy has become way stronger predictors of engagement than they were compared to last year. So maybe this is also taking place in your organization, and that requires some close look. Furthermore, what is the impact of remote working on productivity? So we all see that there is a decrease in productivity, right? But is it because of home working, or is it because of communicating your goals unclearly, or having changing work environment? So in order to understand the reasons for low productivity, and especially in times of remote working, people analytics can be really useful. Last but not least, is digital transformation helping employees to cooperate effectively? I'm pretty sure most of the organizations are making a lot of investment to transform their communication into digital tools, right? But to what extent can you actually cover these expenses or these investments by helping your employees communicate more effectively? This is also something that people analytics can help you with. Last but not least, I'd like to wrap up my presentation by saying, trust the data. It's going to help you better understand what's going on in your organization, especially at this time of COVID, where you're losing physical touch with your employees. Furthermore, trust analytics. So take it as an additional source of information, because from what we know, every organization have changing resources, but one resource is constant, and that is time. So you have to make your investments quite timely and to the right intervention. Last but not least, gain insights for developing effective HR strategies. Get the data and discuss it with your stakeholders, and try to take the best decisions for for one of the two most important assets of your organization. That would be that.
Great. Thank you so much, Baran.
You're welcome.
Before we give the floor to Lamin, we have a question coming in from Linda, who asks, because you and I both work in HR, right? I mean, at least by definition. And she's asking whether we believe that the people analytics should remain in the domain of HR, or whether it should be part of a larger, more central data tower inside organizations. How do you see this?
Definitely both of them are necessary. Why? Because if you actually take people analytics within your own environment, within your own organization, then you can actually spot what is really happening within your organization. Linda, it's really important to understand this. People's experiences and feelings are dynamic, and they can change day by day, such as the conditions. We didn't really anticipate if COVID-19 was coming or not. So it is really important to understand what is really happening in your microenvironment. But also, academicians or research companies or institutions or a place like a factory should keep an eye on the changing circumstances as opposed to people analytics. So what can we actually offer more in depth? And actually, Lamin is going to give a nice presentation about that, how to make use of people analytics on a greater extent. But my recommendation, my personal recommendation, should be keeping people analytics in the micro level for your organization to take the best occupational decisions, as well as on the macro level to understand what's going on in the whole workforce.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Baran, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with
welcome.
us. I mean, I have the privilege of working with you day in, day out, so no surprise.
Likewise.
That means to all the viewers out there, Baran is with us day in, day out. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can leave them with us right now in the form. At the end of today's session, we'll still have some time for you to ask Baran any questions that you'd like. But for now, we're going to give the floor to Lamin Kinteh, who's the founder of Zyvo. And he's going to talk about a very specific application of people analytics, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, but also the economic downturn that I think we're all expecting to show up if it's not here already. So Lamin founded Zyvo, but he has over 20 years in HR. He's a psychometrics and a machine learning expert, so I think he has a lot of interesting things to tell us as well about the cutting edge of people analytics. Lamin, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you here. How have you been so far?
Yeah, well, good actually. It's a strange time. I think one of the good things of this COVID-19 situation, I feel, is that we're all taking like a step back. So life is a little bit slower in pace, and I must say I like that a lot. So maybe that's something that we can combine towards the future to pace a little bit down, spend a little bit more time on the family and everything, and then somehow also see how we can get the work up and running, of course. But yeah, it's challenging times, I must say.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree. Thankfully, the weather is also getting better.
Definitely.
Helps tremendously. So let me not keep you. Please go ahead. People, if you have any questions for Lamin or any for Baran to answer at the end of the session, please fill in the form and we'll get back to you.
Great, thank you very much. So what you can see here is you actually see a beast here. I call it the beast of bias. Everybody has heard of this beast, everybody talks about this beast, but no one has actually seen it. Well, here it is, the beast of bias. Actually, we can also say now that we have another beast, which is the COVID-19 beast, right? But that's something that we are going to focus. That's something that we're going to focus on in relationship to this beast of bias today. My talk is about how to stay diverse and inclusive during a recession. What you see, or you could see an organization as a bus that is driving, and there are people on that bus. There are people that want to get on the bus. There are people who want to get off the bus. And typically, what you see during a recession or a period of economic downturn is that not everyone is allowed on the bus. For one thing, that's for one thing. Some people are requested to go off the bus during an economic downturn. And most of the people that you see that are being affected by economic downturns are women, could be younger people, could be older people, are people from ethnic minority groups. They are most of the time mostly affected by an economic downturn in a sense that they're being disadvantaged. Same applies to people with disabilities. So before we get into the reasons why this is happening and how you could mitigate this, I'll just give like a 1-minute presentation or heads up on about what we do at Zyvo. So we focus on matching people to jobs, either internally within organizations or people hiring from the outside into an organizations. And our focus is on the psychometric side. So do people have the right talents and abilities? We've developed some really cool games to measure all these kind of things, and we apply machine learning, predictive analytics, so that we can actually predict who will be successful in a specific role or not. So that's where the match comes in from with the people analytics side. So we're a very small company, only 7 people around. We won some great awards over the past years in doing the advanced people analytics stuff that we are doing and making predictions on some global platforms. So that's also, we're really proud about that. So let's get back to the reasons why people are being disadvantaged in an economic downturn situation. And a lot of that has to do with human biases. Did you know that we have more than 180 human biases going around in our brain? So there are more than 180 things in our brain that basically mess up our decision-making process. And that's an issue, right? And that issue, we need to mitigate that in order for all these processes within HR, within organizations, to be much more fair. And I can feel you thinking, sure, we as humans, we have all these biases, but I've read in the paper that algorithms are biased too. So why should we go from one thing to another, while it may be even worse than what we are doing at the moment? I'm not really sure if we can do worse than we're doing at the moment, but you're right, there are biases in algorithms for sure. So let's take a look at those machine biases as well. Where do they come from? And again, how can you mitigate those and actually start turning those into your advantage so that you can use a people analytics strategy, you can use data to help prevent that people from disadvantaged positions are being kicked off the bus basically, or not allowed onto the bus. So I'll give you an example on how a machine bias algorithm is being created basically, and also then how you can mitigate that. So let's take an example. Let's say we have an organization and they have recruiters working in that organization, and they want to change their recruiting process a bit, and they want to have the recruiters spend more time on interviewing the candidate and have them spend less time on evaluating resumes. So what they decided is, okay, let's use an algorithm. Let's use an algorithm that can read and scan those resumes, and based on that information, it can make a prediction and say, okay, this is actually a good resume, so that person moves on into the process, and this one is not so good, so this one we're gonna let go. So how would that process work? The algorithm first needs to learn what good looks like. So it needs to be able to recognize what a good resume looks like. So what you do is you go into your organization, you collect all the resumes that you have on people that you've hired, and you indicate them, probably manually say, okay, this is a good resume, this maybe is not so good resume. And based on that information, the algorithm will sort out what good looks like. So for instance, in this example, what you see here is that the algorithm will say and see that the number of words used in a resume are a good indicator of whether the resume will be classified as a good one or as a bad one. So in this example, we can see, if you look in the middle, that if the word count is somewhere between 250 and 400 words, then it would be counted as a good resume, because you see a lot of people seeing at the top, a lot of dots, which are people, you see them at the top, and that will be the indication of, okay, they get a high score, so within those words, that would be a good resume, right? So if you know nothing about machine learning or biases and those kinds of things, you would go for this and say, let's just implement this. However, if we take a closer look and we take a look from a different perspective, then we see that there's something going on with this data set that we are using. We see in this data set that there are actually more men included in the data set than there are women. So the data set itself has a bias towards men. And we know from research that women are using more words in their resumes than men do. So what happens in this situation is, because the data set is not actually a good data set, the situation, what happens is that men are being favored in this case, and women in this case are being excluded from it. So, and this is one of the risks that you could run into if you don't know what you're doing when you are using machine learning and AI techniques. So how can you manage these biases? So we can get biases into machines. We for sure we have biases in the human brain. So how can you manage these biases that come from the machines? Well, I'm going to show you an example on how to do that. But let me say this first. It's much easier to remove a bias from a machine, from a data set, than to try to take it out of the human brain, right? So it's very difficult to locate exactly where in the brain is that spot that causes the biases. Well, in a data set, we can actually figure that out pretty easy. So how could we mitigate that? And I'm just going to give you one example. There are multiple ways of dealing with this, but this is just one example on how to deal with this. So one of the ways of removing biases is to change the structure of your data set, basically. So what you see here is, in this example, is that there are more men than women in the data set. You see on the left the original data set. You can see that in the diagram, in the graph there. So what we can do, what we can use is a technique. It's called undersampling. With undersampling, it's very easy actually. We just take out a random number of men so that the size of the men in the data set equals the size of the number of women in the data set. And based on that, you get an equal situation. And when you then train the algorithm, it will be much more fair than if you would not do that. So that's one technique. The opposite techniques is also possible, which is called oversampling. And in an oversampling situation, basically what you do is, we call that the creation of synthetic samples. Basically, in this case, we would create more artificial women so that we get more women in the data set, and we equal it out. So basically, but the most important takeaway here is data sets are very important in determining whether something will be biased or not.
So Lamin, you're actually saying that even if there are not enough women in this hypothetical example, you'd still be able to compensate for that?
Yes, you can use some statistical techniques to compensate for that. And during the talk from Baran, someone asked something. There were two questions asked. It was the last question.
About whether it should take a bigger role than just HR? That was the second
yes,
question?
yes, that was the thing, yes. So, so I would say you need to have people analytics stay within HR, because the machine learning part that's a really technical thing. Anyone can do that. But machine learning, people analytics is more than just a technical part. On the one hand, it is the technique, and the other one it's the art, basically. It's the understanding of what's happening in the people domain, so to say. If you don't know that resumes are very biased documents, you would just feed it into your algorithms. That's actually the situation that happened with Amazon. There were techies going into that space, and they were just feeding resumes into those algorithms, and then something popped out. If they had taken the time to talk to their people analytics departments or people from HR, they would have known that the resume is not a good document to make predictions on. So that's why I feel that it's very important that it stays within HR itself.
I'm happy that we could give Linda two answers.
Yes,
Linda, you can make up your mind which one is which one suits you best. So from that example, what's quite interesting then is it's kind of a very powerful mechanism, but you need to steer it in the right way, right? With the right parameters, so to speak.
Yes, and again, that is the most difficult thing. It's not running the algorithm itself and doing that. That's only like 5% of the work. The 95% of the other work and time goes into looking at your data sets. What do I want to include? Which parameters, which variables can I use to make predictions on? Does that make sense? Not only is there a correlation, but is there a causation to it? Instead of, those are the important questions that you need to answer. And that's stuff that we do, that we help organizations with, and that's what people analytics departments should do, I guess.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
So, people analytics to the rescue. So where can you actually apply this? Well, there are many situations and places in your organizations where you can apply this. You can apply this in the hiring situation, for internal promotions, personal development, employee engagement. I just want to focus on one of those for now, and that is internal promotions. So how could you get this to work within your organization? What's the process about? So the process is, in the case of with internal promotions as an example, is what you could do in order to create equal opportunities for people in your organizations. Instead of making decisions based on gut feeling, you could add something to that, well, or maybe you want to even take that completely away, of course, but you could substitute that with a process where you identify talents and potential with individuals by assessing them in some formal way. That we do that with personality and intellectual ability and other talents that we identify. That will be the first step, which you see at the top, step one. Then the next step in that process is that you start collecting data on these people. You start to identify, okay, people who are successful in a specific role, what kind of traits and talents do they have? And by using that information and combining that with machine learning techniques, you can actually start making predictions about who will be successful in a specific role. So then the decision making does not have to take place based on gut feeling, but you can actually use data to do so. And this will definitely make organizations more inclusive and more diverse, because you are judging based on objective criteria instead of gut feeling and subjective criteria. So using people analytics makes the process better, makes it stronger. And I would say, as a last note to say, is that it is humans and AI and not humans versus AI. So this is here to help us. And I would suggest everyone to start looking into it if you're not already doing it, and try to get to a situation where you can actually start applying this. Thank you.
Thanks, Lamin. Super interesting. Before you go, I have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
So you've mentioned that there are over 180 biases.
Yes.
How is it possible to remove all of those when working with data and machine learning?
So that's the thing, is you can't remove the biases from the human brains, right? But as soon as you see biases occur in data sets, you can remove them from the data sets. You can. So no, you can't remove them from the human brain, but you can remove them from the data sets, and that's where the advantage is, I would say.
Right. Okay. Another question coming to us through the forum. So we still have some time. If you have additional questions, please leave them. So I think, when I speak to my clients and Baran does his work on the data sets that we gather, we know that diversity and inclusion is quite a hot topic. I think you've clearly explained why that would be one of the first things to suffer in an economic downturn. But if I'm playing the advocate of the devil here, have you also seen results where diversity and inclusion, where we have a moral obligation to strive for that in our organizations? You also seen data sets proving that the opposite is true, that you're better off with a more homogenous group?
I think both is true. It depends on the work and the task that needs to be completed. Maybe for some tasks, maybe specific, identical groups of people would be more effective in doing so. But there are cases, so it proves both ways. There are a lot of cases where it also works the other way around, where you say, okay, I want to have a more diverse group, and that increases performance. So I would say you have to look at it as a case-by-case situation. So that would be my view on that.
Right. Of course, ultimately, we want the right talent for the right position, right?
Well,
without bias.
Yeah, and to add that, we also want to be fair, right? We also want to give people equal opportunities. Right? So you should not be not allowed to be on the bus because of you're old or young, you're black or blue or whatever, right? That should never be the reason.
No, absolutely true. Great. Thank you so much. Can you please tell everyone where you can be found? And then I have a couple questions left for Baran.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. I can do that great by showing this slide. So it shows the information where you can reach us. If you have any questions on predictive analytics or on identifying talents or those kind of things, then reach out and be more than happy to talk to you and see if we can help you out somewhere.
Great. So thank you so much for coming on. I think one of the cool things about these webinar series is that we don't just try to tell our own story, but give a voice to others. So if you're interested in the story that Lamin just told us, if you're interested in Zyvo, please go ahead and check him out on LinkedIn, on the website, and the contact details that we were given. Once again, Lamin, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to ask, with the 6 feet rule in place, of course, because we do have a pretty nice studio setup by now, but we're still struggling with a little bit of space and a number of cameras. So I'm just going to ask Baran to hop in to the screen and ask or answer a couple questions that we have coming in. We still have some time, everyone, so please do add any questions that you have, whether it's for Lamin or for Baran. Baran, thank you for coming back.
Hi, welcome. Long time no see, yeah?
Yeah, long time no see. Your hair still looks great, so
cheers.
Wonderful. I think most of the questions that have come in, and I've seen a couple, people are very interested in our data set. So the 75 to 80,000 responses that you've based your data on. Can you tell us a little bit on first, what kind of shifts do we see happening, when we started measuring in the beginning? And now that we're a little bit further into this crisis and people have maybe settled down a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, clearly it's really difficult to give specific answers to this question because, as I said in my own presentation, every organization has their own conditions, their own atmosphere, their own climate. But from the global data set, what we see is the engagement from the beginning of COVID-19 to this current time is not shifting as much as we were scared of. Huh? So that's the good news. So pretty much the engagement level of the employees are the same as they were before COVID-19 started. So that's a good thing. But what we know is that there's a huge unclarity in people's minds. They are totally frustrated and they are a little scared of what is expecting them. So maybe, as Lamin has explained in his own presentation, what's going to happen when they start looking for jobs, or how are they going to even show that they are performing in the optimum level. So the most discouraging thing that I've seen in the data set was actually this. Beyond that, clearly the house work, the remote working conditions, working from house, has a very interesting impact on working life, as people are now working on longer periods of time, maybe from 8 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening, because they are taking more breaks throughout the day in order to take care of the attention seekers in their house, let's say. But what we are seeing is that people are positive to adjust the changes, but also they are in immense need for guidance from their leadership, goal setting, communication, and motivation. This is what I can actually say. Lamin, do you have anything to add?
No, not really.
All right.
All right, so final question for you, Baran, and then I have one or two more for Lamin.
Totally.
I've seen a couple questions about the reliability of our data set. So whether people are in fact free to answer the surveys honestly, and whether we should be considering other data. Could you maybe give a little explanation of how we try and guarantee that
Absolutely.
from a factory's
Absolutely. Honestly, I didn't want to dive that much into technical stuff, but clearly our data sets are quite reliable and the validity checks have been done. So we can actually share this information with who is interested. I can say that our reliability threshold is slightly below 0.90, which is actually quite acceptable, I would say. And this is what I'm talking about, like only for COVID-19. And also our other scales are quite reliable. So I can actually advocate that for the psychometrics for our scales, there is not much to be in doubt for. And in case you are willing to have more in-depth detail for our survey results, we are sharing it. We are sharing it with everyone that is interested. We are communicating for these results because we believe that data and information is power.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I'll just ask you to step out and have
Absolutely,
Lamin step in.
Switcheroo.
Yeah, the switcheroo. So Lamin, welcome
Yes,
back. Your
thank
hair
you.
too looks amazing still.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you don't mind.
Yeah.
So one question that I thought was extra interesting. So you've talked a little bit about how you use, how you're able to use people analytics for recruiting people.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know that people are going to have longer careers. They're going to work for longer periods of time, which of course in this changing world where different skills are needed over time, and you can no longer do the same job at the start of your beginning as at the end. Talent management has become more important.
Yes.
Could you maybe share a little bit how we'd be able to use people analytics for talent management? So not looking at new people coming in, but making sure that the people that you have in your organization already, that you enable them to perform for a longer period of time, also possibly based on different jobs or functions.
Yeah. So no one knows what the future is going to look like. So it's difficult to already start preparing people for what might be coming if you don't know what it is that is coming, right? So one of the things that we do know is that change is a constant, right? So by looking at people and preparing them for the future, one of the things I would say would be interesting to look at is how agile, how flexible are people in shifting from one thing to another. And we can identify those traits. We can also relate them to performance and see how effective those people are. And then based on that information, you can start creating intervention programs and start training people and educating them about how to become more agile or how to stay agile. So I think that would be a strategy to look for, I think. But it's very difficult to predict what the future looks like. What we've done for an organization, accounting firm, because accounting firms are changing a lot nowadays, what we've done there is that we don't know exactly what the future looks like, but we still want to prepare somehow. So what we ask them to do is, which are the people that you think would be best fit for the future? Without knowing, just point them to us who you think would be the best fit. And then we start identifying what do those people have in common based on the traits and talents that they have. And then we found a pattern there, and then within their training programs they started to develop people towards those talents, or they try to develop those talents more. That's basically a way that they dealt with it.
Okay, so but that of course does mean that you're kind of risking it on what you already have on board, right?
That's basically the biggest downside of it is but you have to take a reference somewhere, and then you cannot. A machine learning model can only learn from what happened in the past, and based on that you try to make predictions towards the future, and then you have to adjust. That's how it works.
Right.
It works well, but it's not like the golden thing that solves all your problems.
All right, so not the silver bullet.
The silver bullet, that's the one, yeah.
A golden bullet.
Yeah,
Let's
golden
meet
bullet,
each other
yeah.
in the middle. Great. Once again, thank you so
Yeah,
much, Lamin.
welcome.
Baran is still in the room with us at an appropriate distance. Of course, I'm also just going to thank him. So this is it for today. I really want to thank you for joining us today. If you have any additional questions for our two speakers, please reach out to them and let us know. If you're only catching the last part of this webinar or you want to share it with others, we'll drop the link in your email right after we finish processing it, so you can share it afterwards. We're going to be back next week again. Next week we'll have Helene Mess with us, and she's going to talk about the employee experience and how to design that also in, of course, these weirder times. If you register for her webinar next week, you actually get a free copy of her latest book on the employee experience. And next week, your traditional host, Arjen Swank, is going to be back in this seat. So thank you so much for having Lamin, Baran, and myself on in your living room or wherever you are. And I hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next. Thank you.